this hybrid and webcasted meeting of the Standards Committee on the 25th of October 2022. Can I please remind you all to switch off your phones or switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting. Please turn your microphones to mute unless you are speaking, both in the chamber and remotely. If in the chamber, please use the microphone in front of you when speaking. Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, you can please indicate either via the chat function or by raising your electronic hand via Teams, or if present in the chamber, please raise your hand. If accessing the meeting remotely, please only use the chat function to indicate you wish to speak. I assume that you've all read the paperwork before today, prior to the start of this meeting. Right, we move on to agenda item 2, and that, are there any interest to declare? If there are, please indicate by raising your hand via Teams, or if present in the chamber, please raise your hand. And when called, state the details. The Democratic Services Officer will forward a declaration of interest form for you to complete and return to the officer.
I can see no indications, Chair, so I think we can confirm there are no interest at the moment.
Thank you very much. Then. So we move to agenda item 3, and that's the minutes of the previous meeting. Before the Standards Committee are the minutes of your meeting on the 30th of July 2022 on pages 5 to 10 of the pack. Members, are there any questions or comments? Please raise your hand or indicate via the chat function. I will call upon you in turn. And could I have a proposer and seconder for the accuracy of these minutes, please?
We have a proposer, Chair, and a seconder.
Thank you very much. Okay, if you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendations.
I can see no indications, Chair, so happy to confirm that those minutes are now approved.
Now we move to agenda item 4, and that's an invitation to group leaders to attend the Standards Committee. In the first instance, can I welcome Councillor Stephen Hunt. Welcome, Councillor.
Thank you.
Leader of the Council to this meeting as our first leader to attend. I'm going to call on Craig Griffiths, Head of Legal and Democratic Services, to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. So members will be aware from previous meetings that one of the new functions of the Standards Committee is to work with group political leaders within the Council to determine how they go about considering standards matters ultimately within their particular groups. So what we decided at our previous meeting is that we would invite group leaders to attend subsequent meetings now of the Standards Committee, and we had a list of questions potentially that we were going to ask them to run through with us, which would help give a flavour as to how they regard standards within their political groups, and most importantly then so we can help them discharge their function which the Local Government and Elections Wales Act stipulated, where they have to put those steps and provisions ultimately in place. It will also help you collectively as the Standards Committee to discharge this new duty that is ultimately on you as well, to work with elected leaders to consider some of these matters. So just to give you an overview, we've agreed that each member will attend one of our prospective standards committees over the course of the next year. I've met individually with the leaders to provide them with some training on what the new group leader duties ultimately are, and we had a session as part of their member induction programme earlier this year. And then the other part of the process is I meet with individual group leaders on a regular basis in order to discuss these matters and make sure obviously that they've got the necessary support ultimately that they need going forward to help them in their duties. So the first member before us today is Councillor Stephen Hunt, the leader of Council. He's had the questions, obviously, that we agreed previously. And with your consent, Chair, I suggest you go straight to the questions and we can have that general conversation surrounding matters.
Thank you, Craig. And thank you, Councillor Hunt, for being here this morning. Councillor Hunt, I will now go through each of the questions in turn that we are interested in discussing with you. Some members may ask questions throughout, but they will have an opportunity to ask further questions at the end. Well, first question is, would you please introduce yourself and explain how long you've been a group leader?
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I know how important the role you have in carrying out the standards of Council and members. I've been a group, this is the tricky one. I've been a group leader when I came in 2008. I became a group leader 2010. I continued to be a group leader then for approximately 8 years. And then sort of more recently, I stepped aside for 1 year to concentrate on other work that I embarked on. And then I became the group leader again during the election. And then hence the election have returned a Rainbow Coalition administration. And therefore, as the group with the largest members, I've now got either the fortunate or unfortunate role as the leader of Neath Talbot Council. I'm Stephen Hunt anyway. My wards are Sem Sisters, Crynant and Oincloyn, as the commissioners, the boundary commissioners, changed the boundaries also at the May elections. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We must be cousins because my wife is from Banwan.
Oh, there you go.
And the second question is, how appropriate do you believe the code of conduct is?
Oh, the code of conduct is vital. It's how it's implemented is something that I sometimes not struggle with, but I think a lot of work or more work is needed on it. But the code of conduct itself in practice is critical. It allows, we've got an excellent officer here in Neath Talbot, so we're very lucky in that aspect. And I don't know about other authorities, but certainly Neath Talbot have got Craig to make sure that we are within the code of conduct. So the role of the code of conduct and how appropriate it's vital. It's something that we all must aspire to. I'm not suggesting all members continue in the way that appropriate behaviour, but I'm sure that will come in questions further down the agenda. But yeah, no, the code of conduct is very appropriate for all local government and everyone in life, really. If we could only roll it out to the communities as well, then that would be a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Next is, what steps do you take to promote high standards of conduct within your political group?
Yes, and again, when you become a councillor, you're sort of a layman. You don't understand. You have to learn. So I'm fortunate enough that I have had 14 years experience. But when you have new members, as Caroline would know, because a member for many years, it's very difficult for them to get into understanding the role. So I actually set up group meetings regularly, worked with officers. Again, it's going to come on to it. I'm sorry, I'm overlapping, but I think training and explaining what it really means. And if they're unsure, I think I always point them to Craig to take that advice that they need to make sure they do not fall foul of the code of conduct itself. So I think the standards of what they are very set very high, but I think it's more about an understanding of them for members. So, but I encourage that, and as I said, we've got a lot of new members again, and within my group, I make sure they are kept fully aware of any changes as well within the standards, because that's critical. Things change on a daily basis. For instance, social media, codes of conduct. So it's probably a very difficult job to keep up with everything that is being done out there, but it's important that members do understand it. So my members are certainly well aware of promotion and what they need to do with training, etc. So they know what it's all about. Yes, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And next question is, what do you understand the role of the Standards Committee to be?
The Standards Committee deals with the conduct of councillors and is responsible for ensuring the arrangements that the council have to deal with complaints against other councillors, making sure they're effective and the council operates to high ethical standards. That's critical. The standards of councillors need to be maintained and obviously investigate any breaches referred to it. So to police the code of conduct and to promote and safeguard the integrity of councillors and its staff. So I would think the responsibility is leading by example with good decision making and being open and transparent, living the principles of the code. I mentioned the political groups have whips, which can also assist the process. However, in the new administration, there are no whips. So it's important that they recognise their own responsibilities and roles, work with the practices of the code of conduct, really. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question, is there any work you feel the Standards Committee should be undertaking over the next year to help you in your role as group leader?
Yeah, again, throwing the emphasis back on the Standards Committee here, I think sometimes the Standards Committee themselves sometimes needs to look. I'll put an analogy of Standards Committee. This is my opinion, of course, as a group leader. It's like a football referee. You get different opinions and views. I think there should be something within the Standards Committee. And I know you have your own rules and regulations, but I think there's something that whoever a decision maker should really be focused and stick to. I think it's something that needs to be consistent then, because you can have different outcomes of different individuals who may be put in front of you. So, you know, it's about understanding your roles with members as well. So I think that training it goes both ways. I'm not aware, you know, I'm new in this role as well, and I'm not aware of the background of the Standards Committee, and I certainly will be looking to investigate that myself to have a greater understanding of exactly what your roles are. And apologies that I probably haven't done the background work for this morning, but I think it's key that it's a two-way communication, understanding process, so that we can make sure the outcomes are what they need to be. So I hope you understand. I think Craig's got used to me in the way I say things, but so that's the work I think, you know, they need to themselves. Yeah.
I think that was helpful, Councillor, and thank you for that. No, don't rehearse, be yourself. Much better.
Oh, thank you there. You'd be sorry you asked me here, though.
Now then, how can the Standards Committee become more active in promoting ethical conduct amongst councillors or co-opted members?
Yeah, I think by circulating cases considered by the Public Ombudsman for Wales, the PCPSOW, Code of Conduct case book, and any other relevant documentation that promotes ethical conduct. I think if continue to meet political group leaders, like you are today with me, but also chairs of committees and chief executives, in order to raise the profile of the Standards Committee, because in reality, again, I've been 14 years, and I would assume there's many councillors, not just in Neath but Talbot, but right across Wales, who would still not have a good understanding of what Standards Committee's roles, what they sort of have that sort of blinkered, you're there to make sure our standards are not broken and punish us if we do. I don't think they understand the complexities of the Standards Committee. So I think also keeping abreast of the Welsh Government's good practice examples. Obviously, political banter in the landscape that we have is always going to be there. It's always going to be a difficult one. It's about where you overstep the mark. Again, for members to understand what banter is and what isn't acceptable. I think current relationships between councillors here in Neath but Talbot within the political sphere is quite good currently. But of course, there'll be challenging times when it comes to, I call it the theatre. You're in the theatre today when we have budget settings and so forth. I think politics then, but the code of conduct needs to be there. And I think agree with the PSOW that those in the political arena need to be a little bit more thick-skinned. I think I've had this advice of Craig many occasions, because strong views occasionally can cross the line. But I think, you have to have a thick skin to take some of the banter, which is acceptable, but without crossing the line. So I think, it's really important that we as members and new members understand the balance and the crossing of the line then, as they say. So that's what I'd say on that. Thank you.
I think, Councillor, you answered most of the next question I was going to ask, and that question was the Ombudsman, the Adjudication Panel for Wales, and the High Court has taken a view on politicians, and in some cases senior officers, having a thick skin on political banter, and political banter being part of the political landscape. I think you've answered this already, but could you perhaps tell us more? What are your own views, and how would you, as a political group leader or committee chair, ensure the line is not crossed between?
Yes, sorry, I did overlap there. I was on a roll, so I was going on. Yeah, because I could see the questions in front of me, so I tend to do that anyway. I think we got to be adults. We got to be grown up. We got to have regular meetings. We got to speak to one another. We got to encourage those within groups to come. It's very difficult. Mental health is a serious concern, right across Wales, isn't it, and the UK, and we don't want anybody to be isolated. So I think, it's good to talk. We had a Let's Talk campaign here in Neath Talbot. So I know that it's for the wider communities, but I think within council sometimes, crossing the line is unacceptable, and we don't want to be running off to Standards Committee or the Public Ombudsman on a whim. We really do need, and I think that within our own group, but I think that is sort of an olive branch to all, whoever you are, the 60 councillors here, all represent Neath Talbot Council to the best of their ability. And I have no doubt of that. I think they all, within their own communities, trying to do the same thing. So I think maybe if we did talk to one another as well, across cross-party collaboration, conversations, making sure that anything that is going on, that we talk to each other. I've been thrown into my new role, and I would certainly welcome any member of council, if they have any issues, to come and see me. And then if I need to bring in Craig or any other representative that's needed, then I would do that. So, and as you said, I did sort of say a few words on it in the last question. So apologies for that.
No, it doesn't matter. It's what we wanted to hear. Right, there's another one. What are your views on the authority's code of conduct training, and how do you rate its effectiveness? Can it be improved? Such as raise the ethical standards of councillors?
The code of conduct training is excellent here and comprehensive. However, refresher training, as I know I overlapped, should be held in relation to declarations of interest. I think sometimes a number of councillors routinely declare interests, perhaps unnecessarily. They err on the side of caution, which is fine. And as I said, Craig is here to support and deal with those declarations of interest. But this is why I keep saying, and I know resources and so forth sometimes play a major role in what we can and cannot do. But I think, again, I said it earlier, and you probably want to tattoo it on my forehead, but training and understanding is critical. I think development, online training, or more interactive training, perhaps. Now that we're into the age of Teams and Zoom, I think training has become quite easier to sort of put on, I suppose. We don't want disengagement. We again, I said earlier that things change regularly. So if you think you've done your code of conduct for 1 year, within a year, there'll be a lot of changes, and you certainly won't know about it. And then you could fall foul, not intentionally, but could fall foul. So keeping work away from you as a standards committee is also critical. No, you don't want vexatious complaints and so forth that fall into those categories. So I think also Craig, again, when he gives us these training sessions and so forth, gifts and hospitality, everybody's asking all the time, is it all right? I did this to help somebody, and they dropped a bottle of wine in my home. No, do they declare that? I think simplifying maybe an online form, maybe members could put in something there so it gets through, rather than taking an awful lot of time bothering Craig when he's very busy. If somebody put in and somebody could monitor so that no councillor gets themselves into difficulty. I think most councillors embrace the training anyway. So personal developments perhaps is key, and then I'll go look at it from the point of my view and members' view. A good attendance at sessions. It's all well and good me saying these things, but attendance is key, and maybe people live such busy lives, members won't attend. So it's difficult, and I think maybe provide other councillors and co-opted members with training skills, that they can take into the workplace and into their own as chairs, and because the code of conduct is through all scrutiny, through everything that we do. So I think social media, as I touched on earlier, that has gone really huge, and there's so much abuse on there, and it is probably unable to be policed by the police. So I think refreshers, as I said, but councillors themselves need to maintain good standards, and also I think this council will have updates on legislative changes because they are there. I think we should lead by example then as leaders and encourage councillors to attend relevant sessions. I keep on about the training because I believe it's probably the most critical element. But so in that, if you are having the training, you need to be there to have that training. But if you're not, for whatever reason, then whoever is needs to let them know. So it gets back to some of the earlier questions in our group meetings that we have regular. That is a topic on the agenda, standards committee. So so it covers a wide range of a lot of the questions that you're asking me. Sorry, I go round the roundabouts and over the swings and so forth, but that's apologies.
I was going to ask the next question, but I think you've already answered most of it. Training for councillors and co-opted members is vitally important. How can the Standards Committee tackle those that do not see training as important? Because it's a thread that runs through all authorities, I think. There are people who don't think that training is important.
Oh,
How would you tackle it?
Well, I think, like you said, I think I've sort of gone answering your questions in not in the correct order. I think we've got internal dispute resolution processes, and they again need to be reviewed. The point I try to make is that in order to procedure and following, should a dispute arise between members of the same political group or others, it's difficult for councillors to find the internal dispute protocol resolution. Why I mention that is because they're probably not even aware of it. But this is why I emphasise the training. I'm sure if Craig said just that question out to members, the 60 of them, and even those that have been here a very, very long time, I don't think they're going to be able to come back with a definitive answer. They can Google it probably and find out, but they won't. So it's tricky. It's very difficult. We are laymen. We women, of course. we are here because we're community champions more than politicians. So a lot of what goes on in legislation, and it's probably over our heads. There are some born politicians within the working relationships of any council, but I would think the majority are not. And they find so much difficulty, and not just in keeping up with standards and all legislative information, but the governors and schools, that's another huge separate challenge for the same sort of standards and understanding of processes within the environment of the school. So I think it's so challenging, and unless you can be a 24/7 counsellor, which I was fortunate to be in 2008, because I had an operation on my spine and I worked on the call and I couldn't go back to it. So I've been a full-time counsellor, and I know, and again, Caroline will know this, how difficult it is to really keep up being a counsellor when you're either part-time or full-time working. So again, I'm sorry I'm digressing, but sometimes the challenges is get younger, possibly pay, and it's not going to happen now in this climate, but paying the right wages so that you have that right person to fulfill the job. And that's no criticism of any councillor that's doing it, because certainly what I see here, they're all doing fantastic jobs in their own communities. It's just my thoughts on when you get in front of standards committees or wanting to have a look at the legislation, they could be reading from hours and hours and hours, and I don't think they have the time to do that. However, again, one of the first questions you asked me, getting back to encouraging so they don't fall foul of certainly the excellent work that you carry out is important. And the last thing I'll say on that, again, is aimed at you as a body, is sometimes to be a little bit tolerant as well, to try and understand the person that you may have in front of you from time to time in the content of. And I'm not suggesting you don't, because you've got some excellent legal officers who understand the complexities. So, yeah, it's a bit of a minefield, if I'm honest, but that's what you get from me, is from the heart, sometimes not from the head. I'm passionate at what I do, and I wouldn't want anybody falling foul of standards committees or public ombudsman, really. So, sorry, I perhaps gone off the subject, but I thought I had the opportunity, so I thought I'd mention it to you.
Oh, Councillor, we're learning as well. The last question is, the local resolution process is capable of being used by councillors. In the event of a dispute, will you be encouraging your party to use the process? And do you consider the lack of referrals to the local resolution process demonstrate that councillors are behaving within the code?
Yes, I think that's self-explanatory, isn't it? I would always encourage members to behave within the code, but it's back to, again, what I said, and apologies, it's about them understanding the code, making sure they're updated, they're making sure they know what the resolutions of the code are, so they don't fall foul. Ask the questions at every opportunity, not just in group, to Craig as our head of legal services in this authority, but something that, there we are. I'm going to give you an example. I'm a perfect example of an early councillor who probably would have broken the code. I mean, in a low level, because I didn't understand it. I would say things perhaps on Facebook that then I needed to have an understanding of. So I think it's a genuine mistake for a lot of members, and that's where the balance comes from. It's all well and good saying to read the resolution, to follow the code, to make sure you have an updated version, which we do. We have the training every year. Craig brings it in, and we have other, and we, especially with new members, and we've had quite a number of new members in this authority, like others, I should imagine. So again, the process starts all over again. So it's there to safeguard them. They know that, but it's about how much time they have to. And I now that I can see a few members here, but I would urge them, and we will in our group, and I would urge all members to make sure they have a full understanding and even question some of the wording within the codes and the relevant documentation and legislation, because I don't understand it sometimes. I don't really know what it means. So therefore, if you don't know what something means, you could fall foul of it, and then you would be in and pointed out you broke Code X22, and it says, and they might not understand, well, what did I do to break that? So I think in layman's terms, getting back to it from where I stand, is that we have to try and find a formula. And I have told Craig this, and it's very difficult, because when it comes down from Welsh Government in legislation format that you also have to apply, is that it's written sometimes in a way that's not as easy for a lot of members to perhaps understand. So I don't know, again, probably a question you asked me earlier is going back to you, if there's a way of getting it in a format that members would probably understand a little bit better. But always ask. That's what I keep saying. If you're unsure, do not post on social media. Do not, in a conversation, say anything. Make sure you have got the information at hand before you do anything silly, really. But again, that's here for us all to understand from your point of view. Sorry. Again, I'm apologising a lot, but
Right. Before you go, I'm going to ask, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Councillor Hunt, now that you've heard what Councillor Hunt has had to say this morning? Oh, Sarah Thomas. Councillor Thomas, you see your hand is raised.
Hi, thanks for that. I was just wondering, are you familiar with what the local resolution code is?
If I can come in, with regards to the local resolution process, Councillor Thomas, in that sense you're referring to?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's relating obviously to member-on-member complaints in that sense. Well, we try to find ways to amicably resolve matters with ultimately going back then obviously through to the Standards Committee and seeing complaints ultimately go into the Ombudsman. It's actually a report we're going to be discussing further on now down the line, exactly for members to see if they've got any amendments they wish to propose to it. But it is a vital document we do try to bring attention to members for, absolutely.
And if I can, Chair, that's the point why I mentioned it. It's very difficult for members or councillors to find details of an internal dispute resolution protocol. So it's something that we need to be aware of, but it's difficult to find, and that's where part of the training, I suppose. I don't know if everything can be covered. It's such a vast document, and so it's just something I thought I've mentioned, Sarah. So sorry.
Okay, Councillor Thomas. Is that okay, Councillor Thomas?
Sorry, yes, that's fine. Sorry, I did give a thumbs up. I didn't realise you can't see. Thanks.
Hey, thanks. Does anybody else have any questions for Councillor Hunt? Louise?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Leader, thank you very much for your very full and comprehensive answers to the questions. Your passion and enthusiasm was certainly coming across to us, and it was very interesting to hear your views on a number of issues. I've got a couple of questions, if I may. I was thinking about your suggestion about circulating the cases from the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales and getting that information across. But at the same time, I certainly recognise, and I'm sure all members would, that you get an inordinate amount of information in any case. And I'm also hearing from what you say about the conflicts between, you know, demands on your time and delivering your duties as a councillor on a day-to-day basis. My concern would be that in just circulating that information to members, with the very best will in the world, it might get overlooked, and therefore the effect of just circulating it would be diminished. So therefore, I'm just wondering what other forum might be best to circulate that kind of information. You may not be able to answer it, and perhaps it's more of a question for Craig, but I certainly think it's a useful suggestion, because it sees, or it conveys to members, the kind of cases that go to the PSOW. But I'm just wondering, maybe a presentation, a summary of it in a forum, perhaps a council meeting, perhaps at group meetings or something like that on a less formal basis, would get that information across. So that would be something you might like to comment on, or not, but that was my thoughts around that very sensible suggestion of yours.
Thank you for that, Louise. I will bring Craig in shortly. No, you're quite correct. The reason I mentioned it is because they can have an understanding of reading case studies, and I believe there's a lot of case studies also in the public domain. But again, I'll rely on Craig. And why I mentioned it here, obviously, it's something I would speak to Craig about in relationship how best it would work. You're quite correct. I'm aware of seminars with Craig in the past, and with his predecessor David Michael, where case studies were referred to in the seminar training, and in other forums of council in seminar training. So I know it's achievable. But I wasn't actually saying that every case study that is. I think if you pick on some that you can give an explanation to in front of members, they'll have an understanding how somebody fell foul, perhaps, to the code of conduct and so forth. So I think a reality of what might have happened to members, and I think, Craig, if I remember, I think we've done that. I think we actually did this. I don't know how long ago because COVID, but I think we have actually brought this up on 2 different cases to explain it in our training of the code of conduct. But I'll hand over to Craig, because I'm saying it, but I would obviously follow procedure and protocol here. Craig.
Thank you, Rita. I think you actually make a really valid point there, Louise. It's about looking at how we communicate the messages through ultimately to members, so they can understand it in an easy process, and they know the impact that a particular decision, maybe that the Ombudsman, the Adjudication Panel for Wales, will have on their day-to-day dealings. We try to make the training a little bit more evidence-based and a little bit more practical by trying to give more of those case studies, more of those scenarios, and to know, well, what impact does it have on members? How did it affect the overarching position that they found themselves in? But it's certainly something I think I need to take away, and I need to give some thought to in how we communicate those elements out to make sure that we're not just throwing information at members saying, here, read this, how do you, and you go away and implement it, but they understand the consequences, they understand why we are making them aware of it and what the importance is ultimately for them. So the way in which that advice is tailored is something I can certainly give some thought to, because it could be, it's a newsletter maybe every couple of months with just short, sharp bullet points. It could be a refresher seminar in that sense, where we look at code of conduct and recent changes maybe that have taken place ultimately within the last 6 months. So there's numerous different forums, and I think it'll be interesting. We can hopefully use the standards committee to bring some precedents through and see what you think would be the best element for trying to address it. We have 2 county borough councillors on the call as well, how they would welcome that training, how they feel ultimately we could do it in a different way. So it is certainly something we can develop going forward to make sure we're tailoring advice bespoke to the members in that sense, and they're getting something practical out of it.
Okay, thank you, Louise.
My second point, observation, and maybe that there is something here which you can also comment upon, Leader. I was picking up perhaps there's three key things that you were saying during your answers. One was about encouraging members to take part in the training, and the importance of the training indeed. And the code of conduct is really underpinned by the training. So in a sense, the training is essential. But I think you made a very good point about members' understanding of the code gradually developing over time, and particularly for new members, where they come in, they have the training on the code, they're faced with, quite a lot of information, and it can take a while. I really appreciate that, to assimilate that information and actually being able to apply it in the context of their work. So I think you made a very good point about how that understanding develops. So therefore we need to look at the training, and I'm sure, Craig, you probably do this in your training because I'm not party to it, but how to build in layers that understanding from that initial introduction and training on the code to as a councillor becomes used to their role, and what actually practically it means when they are doing their business. So I think that maybe is something to think about. And the third thing is about the commitment of members, and I sense that all members are committed to adhering to the code. I think that goes without saying, and I think that reflects on the low number of complaints that actually we see within the County Borough Council. But that commitment has to be ongoing, doesn't it? And it is about attending the training. And you also mentioned that, again, the tension between the members' busy role of doing their day-to-day business, but also perhaps training slipping by the wayside, perhaps with the very best will in the world. So I'm just wondering what you see as your role. You may well have covered it, but perhaps, in the context of what I've said about maintaining or ensuring that members in your group maintain that commitment by attending the training. What can you do to create that culture that, yes, here is the training, and your expectation is that all of your members will attend it, regardless of how busy they are? Because, we can all say, every one of us is guilty of that, isn't there? There will always be something to do, which is a high priority. But how do you maintain training on the code of conduct, and everything around it is top of their priority?
Thank you for that, Louise. And to be honest with you, you're right, I did touch on it, and I spoke about it, and I echo all the comments you made there. And you've just asked the critical question, because as I said, I've been here 14 years, and I've seen members it's been very scarce in meetings, and I'm not just talking about training, and that was the challenge. Now, I'm delighted to say that since the new councillors, certainly within my group, they're very enthusiastic. How long enthusiasm remains is another thing with the challenges, but they don't miss many meetings throughout council at all. So I'm very confident that this is critical, as part of your role. You do not want to get yourself into trouble, and it can affect you very personally and mental health wise because of the pressures. I've felt it. It's like a lump in your stomach, and you worry because of something may have been said, or you don't know what you've done. So I think getting the message across to members is critical. I think other group leaders and members themselves have a responsibility to do that. I think talking to each other, you know, and I think what you also mentioned there, and I think that when Craig perhaps does training, I think maybe representation from the Standards Committee should be there as well, so that we can have an understanding from that side, because it's easy for Craig to give us the rules, regulations, and what we can and cannot do. But I think how you deliver your service, because people are scared of you. Everybody's scared of the Standards Committee. So you're this governing body that nobody sees, and they're all worried that I don't want to be in front of those. You know, it's like a courtroom and so forth. So I think that's important. And the last thing I'll touch on is what you said, and that's what I want to maintain as leader anyway, is that the referrals have been minimal, really, for sort of anybody who's got themselves into any serious trouble, which is really good news. But I think some of them, and excuse my language, as I'm not an educated person, but some of the complaints are sometimes petty and small. Everybody thinks when they get advice, let's just go online and make that complaint to the public ombudsman, or, you know, they even go past the Standards Committee and go straight to the public ombudsman with their complaint. So I think getting back to what I said earlier is understanding the processes, what you should and shouldn't do. So I think it would be a good idea if we have a real full, and all members attend. So there's your challenge, to see how many would attend a full training session with the right people in the room. Again, I would rely on Craig to make sure that happens. So yeah, no, all the points you raised, I concur with. And I'm not saying it lightheartedly. I genuinely believe it and mean it. If we're going to be a good council, which we are, and we got good members, then we all need to make sure we understand our responsibilities and our duties, really, so we don't get ourselves into any difficulties going forward. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And just picking up on one point there, which you made a very good point, and I had actually written that down, was about our collective aim is to remove the fear. And I was thinking about, you know, the members and what the code of conduct, because it is very, very prescribed, and, you know, it is important. It is all about integrity, underpins everything. But it is about removing the fear of it, and to embrace it, and to say, well, actually, it's here for a reason. It's here for members' benefit. And you pointed out, well, actually, members see the Standards Committee with a bit of trepidation, as we're here to police members. So it is a two-way process. So I think you have made an extremely good point there. And coming back to hopefully sort of mitigating members' concern about the code of conduct, you made the point earlier on about members not understanding perhaps some of the phraseology of the code of conduct, or some point about it. And I think perhaps it would be really useful if you could encourage members to actually let Craig know what aspect of the code they really don't understand, and, you know, that there's no shame in saying I don't understand this, because we can't understand everything. It's about, you know, there's no such thing as a stupid question. There would be no such thing as a stupid question about the code of conduct. And the more Craig knows what it is that members don't really understand or need further clarity on, would, I'm sure, be really, really helpful. So perhaps I could suggest that, you know, you encourage members of your group to actually be proactive in just sending a quick email to Craig saying, no, this is not very clear. You know, can we have some clarity on that? Or in the training, can we incorporate it, or whatever it is? But unless Craig knows that, he doesn't really know what the issues are. So that would be another suggestion.
If I briefly comment on that as well, if you don't mind, if you've got the time. When I started in council, you're quite right. You say there's no such thing as a stupid question. I'm quite an extrovert, and I'm not always confident, because I do worry if I have to say anything. And even now in this new role, it's very difficult for me, you know. And that's where you've got to look at each individual councillor You know, there's introverts and some are not, they feel uncomfortable. They may think of something, they'll tell us after a meeting. So I think the challenge that you mentioned there is about speaking up, asking the questions, because Craig probably will tell you, I've asked thousands and thousands of questions in every single committee, and some of them probably out of content or whatever, but I just do it because that's me, that's my sort of DNA. But others, it's about encouraging, supporting, as a group leader, which I do, and I'm sure I do that with members that are cross-party. You know, we want that council, we want them to ask those questions, because their questions will perhaps help us to become even better council going forward. So no, the points you raised there is very clear, and we do that currently. And you know, I think more of it is needed going forward as well, to make sure, you know, Craig is spoken to when they're concerned. And I know he is. And in fairness to Craig, he's a 24/7 officer on weekends as well. So we're very lucky here, Louise, to have some tremendous officer member relationships, and it's always been like that while I've been here. So long may that continue as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Leader. Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I've taken so long, but I've finished my questions. Thank you.
Not at all, Louise. Thank you very much for your questions. Does anybody else have any questions?
Sarah's come back.
Oh, Sarah. Okay, Councillor Thomas.
Hi, sorry about that. As always, Louise has prompted me to to think in a different way, which is very helpful. So I was just wondering, Steve, like, have you, and are you aware of your group members having actually read the code of conduct for the council?
What did she say, Craig? Sorry.
I think there was just a query. Are you aware of members sat down and having read the code of conduct in any detail in that sense within the particular group?
No, Sarah, I'm not aware. And while we encourage them, I would say the ones who have done over a term would have. I'm only referring to new members. I know they've had training, and I said earlier they're enthusiastic. So I can't speak. They haven't told me they've read it in detail. So an honest answer is no, I'm not aware of new members. I am aware of the members that have been here a while would have. And that's why I sort of emphasised the code of conduct changes. So I will be encouraging, or have encouraged them to read, you know, it as it changes going forward, to make sure they're up to date with the code of conduct. But I doubt if many members of the whole authority have read the code of conduct in detail, and that is something we need to encourage so that they can have a better understanding themselves. And maybe if they did, that's a good suggestion. They can ask their questions from within the code of conduct if there's something in there that they're not clear on, which is important. You know, it's no point in reading a document if you don't understand the document. So that's sort of what I made reference to earlier as well. So no, sorry, it's only what I know. I've answered you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas.
Don't know if it's a legacy, will you, Louise?
Louise, your hand, or your electronic hand, is still raised.
Legacy.
Your electronic hand is still raised. Do you have any more questions?
No, I don't. I'm sorry. I was just then trying to find how to lower it. But no, I don't have any more questions. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you, Louise. Yes.
Thank you. To go back to timing, you know, as an ex-member, I think it's very important that we understand how many papers we have to read. You know, when you run several committees, you have pages. I mean, this meeting alone has got 90 pages. If you're on social services, another committee, they're horrendous, you know. So to have something that is easy to read, and I don't mean like a Mickey Mouse guide, but, you know, it does need to be short and easy to read, very succinct, so that members do read it rather than just put it to one side. Thank you.
Nobody else? Yeah. Well, thank you, Councillor Hunt, for your time. I think one of the things that, one of the beliefs I have, when whatever you do, when things start to get difficult to understand, it's always useful to go back to the first principles and find out why we needed a code of conduct. And it's because of the terrible behaviour, the dishonesty and the corruption that took place in the political world many years ago in Parliament, and the Nolan principles that evolved from that. And it was just a set of rules of how you ought to behave. Now, the standards and the code of conduct, Craig might correct me on this, it has to be long and precise, so there's only one understanding of the rules. There should be only one interpretation of it. That sometimes is difficult when you have to read a lot just to get the sense. But the idea is that people should behave themselves according to a code, whatever code it is, code in life, that you're not offending others, that you're not dishonest, that you're not cheating. The people that monitor that are the Standards Committee. Now, I know I was surprised when you told us how remote we sound and how feared we are. I'm beginning to feel drunk with power here. But if you don't understand, then yes, we'd all like to be the Nigel Owen and explain what we're doing before we do it, or the reasons why we're doing it. But certainly you have been very refreshing as far as I'm concerned. It's been educational. I've learned a lot from it, from your presentation, from the questions that have been asked. It's been great. So thank you very much, Councillor Hunt. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but I understand if you're a busy man, you need to leave, then you have to leave. But can I again seriously say and sincerely say, thanks very much for this morning. We've all learned a lot, I think. Thank you.
No, can I just also thank you for the opportunity? And as I said, I'm not academic. I speak always from the heart. I say things probably, if you look back today, I just speak how I see it, how I feel, what I try to do. I hope it's in the right way. I'm passionate at what I do. And I was going to mention the Nona principles today, but on Nigel Owen, I don't know if you saw, on a light-hearted note, he was asked to go to Parliament to when they had the manhandling of one of their votes recently, and he did say on Twitter that, yeah, I got my cards ready, I'm on my way up to sort them out. So I think sometimes in politics you do need to also embrace a bit of a light-hearted approach, because the nastiness, it shouldn't be there, and we all got responsibilities and we to behave. So I think I take on board some of the points you just mentioned to me, which are very important and prevalent. So thank you for that. And I do like to learn from others. So again, I'm always learning. But thanks for your time. Sorry, I usually take everybody's time up far too long, so I'll leave. There we are, making you have a meeting longer than you want now. Sorry.
My father died when I was very young, but I do remember him. He perhaps wasn't the most eloquent person in the world, but one of his expressions that I remember is, I put them to understand. I've done that this morning. Thank you. We're on to agenda item 5, the Independent Review and National Forum. And I'm going to ask Craig to introduce the report for us, please.
Great, thank you very much, Chair. So just a bit of an update for members. You recall in some previous meetings, I talked about a national review that was taking place in respect of the standards regime, looking at ways in which it could be modernised, which ways it could be improved in various different ways. And some of those documentations and the proposal, which is the pending review, are now going to be with Welsh Government to see ultimately whether they legislate on it and make some changes then to the remit of the Standards Committee going forward. And of course, I'll be updating members as and when we know a little bit more from that. One of the recommendations recommendations, though, that they did have ultimately within that group was the creation of a sort of an all Wales standards forum, which is just meant to be a sort of an informal process where chairs of various standards committee and other lay members can come listen to find out what other approaches are going on in various committees, look at if there are ways of shared practices, shared understanding, shared trouble solving, and see if there's any different learning opportunities then that could be brought back to respective standards committees, which we can implement then throughout council. So it's just an opportunity for a group to come together maybe twice a year just to have some discussion on how the standards regime ultimately could be approved in Wales. So included in the report today are some sort of draft terms of reference which the All Wales Monitoring Group have been considering, and the Welsh Local Government Association are happy to be involved in that process, and they will sort of provide secretarial support and serve that forum then as well. So it's brought today before members, ultimately for endorsement, and we hope maybe at some point going into 2023, we'll be able to have one of these first meetings ultimately convened. So once I know a little bit more, of course, I'll bring that back to future reports for members. But again, just before members today for endorsement, Chair, so happy to answer any questions the members may have on it.
Could I have a proposer and second? I'll read that again.
Sorry, I think Louise might have a
Yeah.
question.
Sorry, Chair, what wasn't really a question, it's just an observation to say that I think it's a good thing to have this national forum because we can always learn from each other, and it would be good to see the broader context of what's happening in Wales. So and as I say, take learning or whatever from that forum. So yes, a very good thing, I think.
Okay. Nobody else? Could I have a proposer and seconder then, please? Councillor Thomas. Thank you very
I'm
much.
happy to propose.
And if you've not indicated to the contrary by raising your hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendations.
I can see no indications, Chair, so I think we can confirm that item's approved.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 6, and that's the Town and Community Council Code of Conduct questionnaire. And Craig, perhaps you could introduce the report for us.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just to give members an overview, if you recall at the last meeting, we agreed we would send out a questionnaire to our Town and Community Council clerks to try and get an indication from them on some matters relating to the standards regime. So we agreed a set of questions, and I asked for a return of the documentation then by the 1st of September. So just to confirm, we issued 15 Town and Community Councils. We had 9 responses. Very wide range of set of responses is probably the best way ultimately, I think, to describe it. So if I just do a sort of an overarching summary ultimately of what's been said. So 6 of the 9 councils confirmed that members had received no training. So despite members ultimately being encouraged ultimately to attend training and being provided with the various opportunities, a lot of their members found that they were not actually going to be taking part in that process. 3 of the 9 responses, though, did identify that members will be having training and they will be going through that process with the One Voice Wales training programmes, or alternatively had maybe some of those training programmes. It seems the majority of authorities or town and community councils who do have this training, it is the One Voice Wales training programme that ultimately that they're utilising, and it's a very good training programme. I've watched it myself and I've been part of that process, so I can see that it does cover off all the essentials and it's very much factored on town and community council, so hopefully it could be quite beneficial to them. So again, it is quite a good training package if members were ultimately to take up on it. It was interesting that one town and community council commented that on training and their induction programme in particular, they're provided with a list of key training that they have to undertake as part of their declaration of office. And I think what that did sort of suggest to me that there are 1 or 2 town and community councils who do make this training mandatory. By law, there's no requirement ultimately for it to be mandatory, and it's up to an individual resolution of each town and community council whether they wish to make it a mandatory or not. Now, there aren't really any consequences ultimately, though, if members decided that they were not going to do the training, but it is a sort of statement of intent from the Town and Community Council, which I think is one of the best way of ultimately looking at it. Fortunately, I think in most town and community councils, what we were able to identify is that they don't really have many referrals or any breaches of the Code of Complaint. There was one town and community council who indicated that they received 5 complaints, in each of which were ultimately referred on then to the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales. Some of those were not ultimately investigated by the Ombudsman because they considered them to be low-level complaints, but nevertheless, people are aware of the forums ultimately that are in place if people want to sort of progress it to that level. All members were made aware, and all town and community councils were aware that they can apply to the Standards Committee for dispensation, so that was good to see. We don't get that many for the most part, but it's good to know that at least that message is out there, that those opportunities can be considered if and when the need arises. But what it perhaps raised with me when I was thinking about it is, well, do they not actually understand the concept of personal prejudicial interest, meaning that they would need a dispensation ultimately to be able to speak? So it did identify perhaps a training issue there. 8 of the 9 town and community councils have a local resolution process in place, and others are considering it, but they weren't too sure when they were ultimately going to bring that in. So it's good to see that people are identifying the methods that could be in place to try and deal with some of these low-level disputes. We also asked the question, was there any support you feel the Standards Committee could provide to town and community councils? And a lot of them highlighted maybe a document reiterating why it is important that the Code of Conduct needs to be referred to. I've just put in the report there as well that we have issued that previously to town and community councils because the Ombudsman produces a very good guidance note in that regard, which is very easy to read, very user-friendly. So maybe it's following up subsequently from that. It's been suggested ultimately in some town and community councils that we promote the concept of a training coordinator, where one councillor helps to ensure that training takes place ultimately for the various members on that town and community councils. And I think they would appreciate some support from the Standards Committee in trying to promote that message. And just general advising that it's imperative ultimately for members to complete the training. And I think it goes back to what we heard from our group leader discussions earlier on about how we promote those messages ultimately within the group. So I've come up with a couple of suggestions, maybe as part of the general discussion in which way we could take this forward, which I've included in the report. One, for example, would be a document to our town and community councils on the importance of complying with the code and some follow-up on those particular elements, but also perhaps a letter from the chair of the Standards Committee to explain that why you view it as important and what the significance ultimately behind it was. And again, try to dispel some of the myths, what we heard earlier on about what the work of the Standards Committee will be. I've discussed the possibility of me undertaking a virtual training session, which potentially then we could distribute to all members so they could watch it in their own free time. So rather than town and community councils having to pay for additional training or whatever the case may be, there can be one standard recording out there, or whether I could get somebody else to do it on my behalf, which might be more advantageous for me. But we can try and work at some options to try and make sure that we can try and promote that message in. And as part of that, maybe we could include some messages from the Standards Committee in that sense about how we take that forward. So again, trying to encourage visibility and make sure that we're trying to promote those messages. And again, one of the things we've been trying to do is promote the opportunity for members of the Standards Committee to attend town and community councils so you can view for yourself how things are operating and whether you see any concerns in that sense. So we continue to promote that message as well. So an interesting set of results ultimately that came back in. There wasn't anything there that immediately surprised me. And I think it sort of follows from what we've seen in previous years. But I think there are certainly some proposals we can look to try and implement to try and drive this forward and trying to promote the standards regime as much as possible within town and community councils. So happy to answer any questions, Chair, on that.
Thank you, Craig. Do you have any questions or comments, members? If you,
Councillor Thomas.
yeah, Councillor Thomas, you've got a hand raised.
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, I just wanted to point out that on page 26, entry 4, it does say that 8 responses were received, whereas it was obviously 9.
My bad. Sorry, Councillor.
That's all right. I just thought we might need correcting. Also, so with the One Voice Wales training, I know they do some free training, which is basically just like a PDF, sort of quite almost like a presentation in PDF form, which is very simple and straightforward. Do we know if that was the training that they were talking about, or whether it was the paid course, or usually paid course, should I say?
I've just been referred to the fact that they've undertaken the One Voice Wales training. My understanding, it could be the paid course ultimately that's going forward for the majority, but I haven't had any official confirmation on that.
Okay, so in relation to that, you're aware that I sit on the community council, and indeed that we don't currently have a clerk. So it could just be that it didn't get forwarded. But we've literally, so far as our council is concerned, only just received the training schedule from One Voice Wales following the election. So we wouldn't have been able to undertake training until now. So that might have been a factor in the reason why some people haven't done training so far. Just for committee to be aware, really. Do you feel like this is heading in the right direction or an improvement on what's gone before?
I think there is in that sense for it. I mean, we've done similar questionnaires over the last couple of years, and they have revealed that when you sometimes look at town and community councils, the level of training perhaps isn't as extensive, obviously, as what the county borough councillor offers, which of course is understandable because they're very different organisations and with very different roles ultimately as part of it. We've been trying to encourage the message in respect of standards in different ways. So, for example, I've done some train the trainer type events where I've worked with clerks within town and community councils. I'm giving them some of the key messages which they need to get across to the members. And for the most part, I believe it's working because, you know, there are low levels of complaints ultimately coming forward where there are any breaches or anything that ultimately ends up coming before the standards committee. So I think we can take comfort in that. There aren't any systematic issues or any problems ultimately within the town and community council setup, because if there were, we'd be hearing about them in the standards committee and we would have a number of referrals ultimately being made to us. But I think what it does just show is that people may be aware of some of the duties, but they're not going through that formal training process. They're not having maybe the time or the opportunity to be able to sit down and ultimately see the benefit that the training ultimately provides. So it's about how we can try and find ways to get that message across and give people those opportunities. And I think that's where now we've got to use some of the technological advantages against us. So it would always be perhaps impossible to get every town and community councillor in one room ultimately for me to deliver that training. But if we can send out a 30-minute recorded session which people can watch at their own leisure, or town and community councils can put it on available for everyone to watch at one time, there may be some avenues ultimately to do so in that regard. So I'm looking to see now how we can fine tune those practices to take advantage of the situation and get that message out there.
Thank you. So, and to be honest, the training that we did as part of the induction, I think there was a recording of that. So I mean, that could always be made available outside of the organisation or something. Although you might want it editing of it or something.
Probably, absolutely right.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, absolutely. When I've done deliver training for town and community councils in the past as well, I try to make it a little bit more applicable to them, because there are different rules, obviously, which a county borough councillor needs to be aware of compared to a town and community councillor. So we do try to measure it and dovetail it in so it's more relevant ultimately to the type of ultimate matters that they'll be considering.
I think primarily it's the 2016 amendments that come into play there. But all right, thank you. It was just to sort of touch base on a few things. Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of things, really. Our council is a member of One Voice Wales, and they do excellent training. They do an awful lot of courses. Some need to be paid for. They're about £35. There are some free ones. Code of Conduct is one. Excellent training programs, and there are they send them out, the training schedule out every month. And there are several options on each course. So there are afternoon sessions, evening sessions. So, you know, there's plenty of choice for people to listen in on. And I think Alison, who works in Democratic Services, she used to do the training for One Voice Wales at one time, so you could pick your brains on that. I also think that a letter from Craig to all the clerks would be an excellent idea, because I think sometimes the community town councillors, they might not listen to each other, but they'll certainly listen to the clerk. So I think, you know, that's one way of getting this importance over how important this is that they do this training. But I vote for the One Voice Wales training, and as I say, there are bursaries for some of them. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Louise?
Thank you, Chair. an observation really, in that, of course, we don't know what's happening in the other councils who haven't returned the questionnaire, but that is what it is, isn't it? And just reflecting on what Steve was saying in his talk to us about members' understanding, it's difficult for us to gauge how well members of community councils do actually understand, taking the point that understanding develops over time, and for new community councillors it's going to perhaps be less than what more experienced councillors are. But we are limited in what we can do. I do appreciate that. I think the suggestions that Craig has put in the report are really, really good. And I just wondered as well, when we do attend the Standards Committee, whether the clerk could invite us just to say a few words about our role as Standards Committee, and so that we could then reinforce certain aspects of our work, and particularly in relation to the code of conduct, and just do that in person. I think the letter would be really, really good, but I just wonder if when we attend we could also do that, which would also help to get the message across, and also encourage people, if they don't understand, what is it that they don't understand, very similar to our members of the County Borough Council. If they don't understand aspects of it, to encourage them to either speak to the clerk or to come to Craig about it. That would be my other suggestion to add to the list.
Absolutely fine. I can make that reference in the letter ultimately that we send to the clerks in due course, and we'll just ask if they can build that in as part of the attendance programme. It's absolutely appropriate to do so. So I'll make that request.
Does anybody else have any questions? No. Okay. The report is before members for consideration and to look at particular steps. So I believe we've covered these off as part of the discussion. And that, I think, takes us on to agenda item 7, and that's the local resolution process. And again, I'll ask Craig to speak on that, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So obviously members will have heard a lot about the local resolution process with regards to the discussion ultimately that we had with the Leader of Council earlier on. But just to give you a quick overview as to what this is intended to be a document and a process which encourages informal resolution to minor disputes ultimately between members. So if there's been a falling out between two potential members, there's been some allegations where members have not been showing consideration or respect to each other, and it will allow those matters to be resolved via a sort of an appointed mediator who will help to try and find a solution so both members can move on without having to go through the formality or any process then with the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales. The Ombudsman's office does actually encourage members to utilise this local resolution process. So if, for example, they were going to make a complaint about another member, one of the questions the Ombudsman will ask is, well, have you been through the local resolution process? And if not, why not? So it is something now that is actively being encouraged in that sense. It's rare ultimately to be used, as you see within report. In the last 5 years, we've only ever had one referral, which ultimately went through this process. So it is something that members are aware of it, but I think taking the point ultimately that the Leader of Council mentioned earlier on, they may not necessarily be aware of its current existence or perhaps ways in which it can be used. So I think one of the points I've taken away from the discussions today is perhaps to a note out to more members to remind them of what this process ultimately would be, and if they ever wanted to consider it down the line. I think what we are going to see a little bit more of as time goes on as well, as I mentioned in the report, is more use of local resolution being encouraged, and instead of it making optionally ultimately for members to go through it, they will actually be compelled that they have to go through local resolution before a complaint to the Ombudsman ultimately can be considered. So all in all, very useful document what we have, and it's quite a sort of vague process ultimately, I could argue, that you go through. It's just about finding ways for members to come to a sort of amicable resolution to a matter without having any formality associated with it. If it's the case then that they decide, well, they can't reach a resolution via an appointed mediator, we allow the matter to come back before the Standards Committee and of a panel made up of members from the Standards Committee to try and find if there's an alternative solution without having to go down the route of an ombudsman process. So trying to get the message out to encourage people to ultimately use it, I think, is the key message to go away. But it's before members today, just in case you had any queries, any comments or any suggestions associated with the same, so I can factor that into any sort of correspondence that we look to issue in due course. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. Are there any questions, any observations, members? Louise, your hand is raised.
Yes, it was raised from the last item, but I do have a couple of questions on just really for clarification. So you have to bear with me while I'm juggling the screen to go back to the papers. Just a sec. Right. Right. On section 2, this is really for clarification. Interestingly, it says members should seek to work with members of adjoining electoral divisions, and then it goes on to say about a constituent. Sorry, it's paragraph 2.2. A member who becomes involved in matters specifically related to another electoral division or representing a constituent in another electoral division. I was interested, just to clarify that traditionally members who are or rather constituents of a ward would go to their local ward member, but this seems to be saying that actually they could go to another member and that's okay, who is not in their ward, and that also members should seek to work with members of adjoining electoral divisions, and again, regardless of party or political group. So that was just a, I suppose, an observation, and yeah, I was just noting that, and whether that might cause problems. If a member was representing another constituent, but it certainly seems to give the more freedom to the constituent to go to another member if they wish to. I guess that's the purpose of it.
If I can just come in there, you're absolutely right, Louise, in that sense. And it is something that we have seen occasions of concern and complaint ultimately addressed previously in that regard. And for example, a constituent may go to somebody outside of their particular ward because they've got maybe a personal relationship with that member. Maybe they're from a political party that person is ultimately involved with or has a connection in some way. So there has been some consternation on that issue, particularly raised in the past, which we've had to try and address. And sadly, the message is that an individual is free ultimately to go to who they choose. They don't necessarily have to come to you. We try and encourage the members ultimately to work together or not to be seen to be causing any particular tensions or to cause any issues in that regard, because I like to remind members that their duty is not necessarily to their ward, their duty is to the County Borough Council as a whole, which is their main obligation, which is what they sign up for when they are first appointed. But nevertheless, there can be consternation ultimately caused that. And I have had the conversations, I've had to sit down with members and explain, well, there's nothing wrong in doing this. If somebody wishes to go down that route, it may not be particularly happy for yourself or comfortable in your own view of it, but it's absolutely appropriate if somebody wanted to go down that route.
Okay, thanks, Craig. I was just wondering, is paragraph 3 in the wrong place? Because it says behaviour described in the paragraphs above. Does that refer to section 1? Because when I was reading section 2, section 2 didn't come across to me as that was going to be a breach in terms of behaviour. So
absolutely correct. Yes, I think it needs to be reversed above in that sense. So I'll swap 2 and 3 around in the next iteration of the draft. Thank you for pointing that out.
That's fine. I'm just glad I was reading it in the right way. I had a question on paragraph 4.6, which is that I think it mentions that a member may be accompanied by a friend, but shall not be represented by a solicitor or a barrister. Could that friend be another elected member, or is it not? Is it somebody who is outside of the democratic process?
It can be another elected member. My advice, though, sometimes is not necessarily to bring an elected member, not necessarily for that member who is come before the mediation or come before the panel. But if an elected member is there in a supportive capacity, it can sometimes place them in a very difficult position ultimately going forward, because they have to continue relationships ultimately with other members, and they are very limited in what their involvement could ultimately be, so as to not place themselves in any breach of the code of conduct in any way. So I would encourage it to be somebody other than an elected member, but there is nothing stopping an elected member being that person.
I just wonder, therefore, whether it might be helpful to include that, so that maybe it's clear then that precisely that point that you've been making, Craig, or would you not wish to see it that there?
No, that's absolutely fine. We can add that in. I don't see any issue with that at all. I think as much clarity we can build into these documents, the better. Okay. So that's absolutely perfect.
Okay. Then I had a question on paragraph 4.8. It says the complainant member may refer the matter to the PSOW, and then consideration will be given to whether to investigate. But I think that seems to give. So would they do that and bypass the procedure? And go straight to it? Just seemed to be that they didn't have to therefore use the procedure, and they could go straight to the Ombudsman in any case. So I was just wondering, how that was going to work.
Again, you're absolutely correct in the sense there's no legal compulsion that they have to go through this process. They are able to go straight to the Ombudsman in that regard. The Ombudsman, though, will ask the question, well, you've chosen not to go through local resolution process. Is there a good reason why that ultimately is the case? And so the member in question would have to justify that as part of the process. And it could lead to, for example, the Ombudsman saying, well, no, I would prefer you to go through local resolution process first. So I'll refer it back to you to make that determination as to what approach, but I will not investigate it until these issues have been overcome. The Ombudsman tries to take the view he likes a low level, she likes a low level resolution of complaints, matters to be dealt with in-house as much as possible to negate the time and expense, obviously, of what an Ombudsman investigation would bring. So they will try and refer that back unless the member has very genuine reasons why they feel local resolution is not going to work here.
Yes, okay. Again, I wonder, would it be helpful to actually say that although they may refer it to the PSOW, they will be asked to justify why they have done that if they have not used the local resolution panel. Again, just for clarity, and it would perhaps help to, if a member was thinking of going down that route, get them to think twice.
Absolutely, I'll add that in. Thank you. Okay.
That was all. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Chairman.
That's good.
Thank you, Louise. Anybody else? No. Well, again, the report is before members for consideration and to look at particular steps. So I believe we've covered these off as part of the discussions we've just had. And that takes us to agenda item 8, and that's members officer protocol. And again, could I ask Craig to present the report, please?
Great, thank you very much, Chair. So again, this is another protocol which embeds a lot of our provisions within our constitution. And I think you heard the Leader of Council saying earlier on that the relationship between officers and members is the linchpin ultimately of what local authority is about and the various different roles. But as part of that, we need to have protocols ultimately in place to ensure that there's no blurring of responsibilities and each is clear on what their respective role ultimately will be in the process. So as a council, we've adopted what we call our protocol on member and officer relations, which just aims to set out some of these responsibilities and some of these obligations and to make sure that the boundaries are clearly in place. And so we have a good system of governance ultimately within the council. I realised I never actually brought this revised version ultimately, which is a nationally agreed model, which comes from the Welsh Local Government Association to our standards committee previously. So again, it's before members today, just for you to be aware of its content, some of the different matters ultimately which it contains. And if you've got any particular comments or any queries or amendments you'd like to suggest, we can try and factor those in then to any future iterations of the draft ultimately that we provide. So happy to take any questions, John.
Thank you, Craig. Louise, you wanted to speak?
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you. Again, just a couple of questions for clarity, please, Craig. First of all, this protocol was attached to the report around the community council training. Was it supposed to be attached to that, or it certainly was in the?
I think it was just an inadvertent error when the
Right.
document
Oh,
pack was
that's-
ultimately
that-
created. It's just specifically for this
Yeah,
document.
okay. I thought it was. I just needed to check that. Right. On paragraph 1.7.2, very last line, the 5 working days, the 5 is in square brackets. So is that to be determined, or is it?
We've
5
always
working
worked on the
days?
assumption of it being 5 working days. I'll take it out of the
Okay.
brackets just
Right.
so we've got that there.
Okay, thanks. I just wonder whether that was something, was it going to be more or less? That's fine, thank you. 7.9. Again, please excuse me. So I'm scrolling through the paper. 7.9. Oh yes, towards the end of the paragraph on page 64, it's just referring to negative advice, and I think it was just around just making the point that it's negative to the member. The advice may be advice that the member doesn't wish to hear, so therefore it is negative in that way. The advice is not wrong. The advice is correct, but it's just not what the member might want to hear. Yeah, so it was just really clarifying that that's actually what it means, rather
Yes,
than.
absolutely
Yes.
correct. Yes, it's
Okay.
just the advice which they
Yes.
wouldn't necessarily wish
Yes.
the officer to be given,
Yes.
depending on the circumstances.
That's right, yes. And then in paragraph 1.11.1, 1.11.2 in fact, employees are prevented from being a member of Parliament and a member of the European Parliament. I'm assuming although we're no longer in Europe, we could have officers working for us who are European nationals, and therefore does that cover that provision when member of a European Parliament is mentioned, or is it there for another purpose?
I quite like that assumption that could be the case. I think it could have just been left over from previous drafts, obviously, in the sense that when we would have
Yes.
been member of European
Okay.
Parliaments. But I think the logic you just applied to that, Louise, I think I will run with, because
Yes.
I quite like it in that
Right.
sense. So I think we'll go with that.
Okay. That's fine. That was all the queries I had on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Is there anybody else? Any questions, any observations?
There was a comment in the chat, Chair, from Councillor Thomas about the term advice to the negative might be clearer, and I'll see if I can clarify that language just to make it a little bit more coherent so members are aware what we're referring to there. So thank you for that, Councillor Thomas, as well.
Okay, then. The report, therefore, is for members to note, and takes us to agenda item 9, the Ombudsman's annual report. And again, perhaps Craig would present that for us.
Thank you very much, Chair. So again, this is one of the annual reports ultimately we bring to the Standards Committee. The Ombudsman every year produces an annual report of what matters he's investigated previously, and this report relates to the period from April 2021 to March 2022. And as you will see, it's quite self-explanatory as you go through the process. It gives you an idea of the types of complaints ultimately we've dealt with and the particular service areas for that. I think the two elements which are obviously specifically relevant to our Standards Committee today are Code of Conduct complaints ultimately relating to that period. So as you will see that there were a total of, sorry, to double check, 9 complaints ultimately referred to the Ombudsman in respect of Neath Talbot County Borough Council members. 5 of those were discontinued, and 4 of those showed no evidence of any breach ultimately as part of that process. And then the number then in respect of town and community councils, we had 4 which were referred to in respect of Britain Ferry Town Council. Again, there was no evidence of breach, so they were ultimately no further action taken. And 2 in relation to Neath Town Council, which again didn't proceed any further in that regard. So overall numbers quite low in that sense. There has been a slight increase from the previous year for county borough council matters, but then for town and community councils, the level have decreased. But what I've just included ultimately within your report then as well are the steps we take in authority to try and continue that reduction in case numbers. And that involves, for example, doing some of the training work ultimately with clerks, which we've discussed, having forums where people can raise those discussions, and then just trying various different avenues, all with the aim of improving the take-up of the standards regime and make sure that the number of matters which come before you as standards committee are then reduced as part of it. So again, happy to any questions on that, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. Do you have any questions, any observations? There is one, it's just curious, it's in Appendix B and in complaints received by a subject. There were 8 complaints about complaints handling.
What that tends to relate to, Chair, is, for example, a member of the public has made a complaint against a council service in that sense, and maybe there'd been a delay in the complaints officer ultimately coming back and being able to consider it, or it'd been over the timescale that we specify in our complaints policy itself. So that when it referred to complaints handling, that's what it does tend to normally cover off.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Does anybody else have anything to say? Can't see anything. So again, it's a report for members to consider. And I think we've covered off all of them by the discussion we've had. So on to agenda item 9, and that's the forward work programme. Again, I'd ask Craig to, oh, sorry, it's just for us to consider if you, any matters or any items or any matters that concern you, I'd encourage you to discuss them with the monitoring officer. And then on to agenda item 11, which is urgent items. There's one urgent item I'm going to hand over to Craig to address. And after that will be the end of the business of today's meeting. And I thank you all for attending.
So it is marked as one urgent item. There are no papers ultimately associated. I just wanted to flag up to members of the Standards Committee that today is actually the last meeting of our chair in respect of his role as chair of the Standards Committee. When members are appointed to the Standards Committee, they're appointed on a specific time limit and that they can only serve one term and one extension. So Cliff, sadly, his term has now expired and it will expire probably in January this year, but this is the last scheduled meeting that we have in the calendar for this year. So just on behalf of myself, the Democratic Services officers, and I know the rest of the Standards Committee as well, I just wanted to thank him for his work over the last couple of years, particularly in his chairing of the role since I came into post in 2018, and just to add, we very much miss you. So thank you for everything to date, and just on behalf of the council for the time and effort that you've put into your role as well.
Thank you very much, Craig. I've enjoyed it. I've seen lots of changes as you do in any role that you take on. I've seen changes in membership of the Standards Committee, changes in attitudes, some significant political changes in the council. Considering the heritage of Neath, Port Talbot being a very industrialised area, it was dominated by one political party. That's been a significant change. But for all that, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been very satisfying and I've made good friends. And I'd like to say thank you very much to all and every one of you, to each member for all the help you've given me. Thanks a lot. Sorry, Louise.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank you on behalf of all the committee members, past and present, for your very able and competent chairing of the committee and for your wisdom and guidance and your good humour. It's always been a pleasure to attend the Standards Committee, but under your chairmanship, an even greater pleasure. So thank you very much on behalf of us all for your contribution to the Standards Committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. Thanks. Councillor Talbot.
Yes, I wanted to reiterate Louise's point, but also say that as a new member, having an experienced chair in place as I joined, such a extensive and critical committee is really helpful. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, that's the end of the business. Thank you all very much for attending, and hope to see you again sometime. Bye now.